Welcome to BBC News. I'm James Reynolds. Our top stories. The Lebanese army retakes government buildings in Beirut after they were stormed by protesters angry over Tuesday's explosion. Thousands demand regime change on the streets. Protesters are hit by tear gas. A police officer dies in the violence. No compromise in Congress as to how much to fund out-of-work Americans, so President Trump controversially forces through his plans with executive orders. A paradise polluted, more oil spills from a stricken ship off the coast of Mauritius as the island declares an environmental emergency. Hello and welcome to BBC News. Thousands of people have taken to the streets of the Lebanese capital Beirut in anger at the country's leaders. That follows this week's devastating explosion in the port area of the city. Groups of protesters stormed a number of official buildings. They briefly occupied the foreign ministry before being driven out by the army. Earlier, riot police used tear gas to disperse the crowds. One police officer was killed in the clashes. Our Middle East correspondent Quentin Somerville spent the day among protesters.
Lebanon's rage against its elite is erupting anew. A city in the aftermath of an explosion is filled with tear gas and anger.
The protests have barely started and already there's tear gas coming in here from all sides. The protesters are falling back at the moment, but they keep continuing to push forward.
"We are rebels, free men," said this man. "They fired directly at us." And a city still reeling from the shock of the blast was met with violent force. They came to condemn the government they blame for the destruction of their city and their lives. And this is the fate Lebanon's politicians deserve, they said.
Can you tell me in English what's written?
We're gonna get our justice from your necks.
They'd started with a roll call of the dead. Among the names, 43 Syrians and the wife of the Dutch ambassador to Lebanon. They carried aloft the pictures of those killed.
We're fed up. We're fed up. This is our country. This is our country, and we want to defend our country. Our president is useless. Our prime minister is useless. Everyone in this government is useless. They killed us.
We literally reached rock bottom. I don't want to talk about it because I'm going to cry.
These weren't just hardcore protesters. Lebanese of all walks of life joined the demo too. Among them, Rola Stefan. Earlier, with her husband George, she showed us their destroyed apartment. Their business was in the port too.
Everyone is to blame for where we are today. For losing our money, for losing our jobs, for losing our businesses, for losing our homes, for losing our loved ones, our friends, everything. They are all to be blamed. They are all to be hanged.
In the morning at the port, Prime Minister Hassan Diab acknowledged the anger but took little responsibility.
Absolutely, they have the right to be angry and furious, not just because of this. This is absolutely diabolical what happened, but however, they are also furious even before that, for 3 decades of unbelievable corruption.
The violence reached a crescendo and then it was over. The police and army regained control. This is a country ruled by force and backroom deals. They've been calling for revolution here for almost a year. But Lebanon's elite has staying power. The force of the disaster which engulfed this city may not be enough to bring change here. Quentin Somerville, BBC News, Beirut.
We'll continue our coverage of Beirut in a moment, but first, it's 75 years since the US dropped 2 atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and then Nagasaki in Japan. It led to the end of the Second World War. The first bomb, which landed in Hiroshima, is estimated to have killed nearly half the city's population. At least 70,000 people died in Nagasaki on this day, the 9th of August, 75 years ago. Radiation from the bombs caused the deaths of thousands in the months and years that followed. And we're looking at live pictures from the memorial site in Nagasaki. The mayor of Nagasaki is addressing the gathering. And in the last minute or two, we've just seen a bell tolling at the Nagasaki Peace Memorial site, where there are a couple of hundred people including survivors and including the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. And that bell tolled to mark the exact moment, 75 years ago, in which the US bomber dropped its bomb, codenamed Fat Man, on the city of Nagasaki. It dropped and fell at 11:02 and 35 seconds in the morning. Nagasaki had not been the main target that day. The Americans had been attempting to bomb the site of Kokura, but visibility problems meant they switched to their backup site, Nagasaki. The bomb was dropped on the city's Urakami Valley, and 53 seconds after its release, the bomb exploded at an altitude of around 1,800 feet. And one young boy, Yoshiro Yamawaki, who was 11 years old, said he was in elementary school, and at the time he said he was at home. We went to the sitting room at the back of the house, he said, and while we were sitting around the table, a whitish blue light shot across the room. Then came a roar that seemed to shake the whole house. The two of us got down on the tatami mats and covered our eyes, ears and noses with our fingers, just like we'd been taught to do. While we were in that position, plaster debris came falling down on us. Well, there's another piece of testimony to bring you, because Terumi Tanaka was also a school pupil, a 13-year-old, when the bomb was dropped in the hometown of Nagasaki. He was reading a book and recalls the moment of the explosion.
All of a sudden, I heard a big sound. I didn't know what the sound was. But as soon as I thought I heard the big sound, my surroundings turned bright white. People say it was a flash, but to me, everything turned bright white. I didn't hear a sound, so I was surprised. I felt this was something terrible, so I ran downstairs and ducked. I covered my ears and closed my eyes, and the moment I ducked down, I lost consciousness. In the burnt ruins there were shapes that resembled human beings or bodies that had crumbled into bones everywhere. Rescuers hadn't arrived after 3 days, so those who couldn't move due to serious injuries or severe burns and hadn't received help were hunched or lying on the ground.
The testimony of a survivor of the atomic bomb attack in Nagasaki. Well, let's go back to that memorial event in that city, that, of course, that rebuilt city. Campaigners in Nagasaki say that they now wish for the establishment of a lasting world peace and for the abolition of nuclear weapons. Well, returning to Lebanon now, another of our correspondents in Beirut, Karin Torbay, says that protesters' anger is directed against the country's entire system.
It's very unlikely that what the Prime Minister suggested will really be seen as an acceptable proposal for the masses. I mean, what people are angry about is not just, this specific government, is what they call the regime. The regime has to do with the group of sectarian and long-time entrenched political leaders who are considered as the main rulers of this country. And what people are asking is a complete change of mentality and of the way this country is run, because they perceive that basically what happened on Tuesday was the epitome of decades of corruption, mismanagement and total negligence. So basically what the Prime Minister tried to do is to calm the masses, to tell them that I will be leaving probably in a couple of months if all the political leaders can agree on some sort of transition or of an alternative. He has called for early elections, but this proposal itself is not 100% guaranteed to bring change. Many fear that elections at this time might bring in the same political parties, and therefore they don't consider that this is the real way for change. And also it remains to be seen how cooperative the other political groups will be with the Prime Minister's proposal.
Well, that was Karin Torbay. Well, a third of our correspondents in Beirut, Lena Sinjab, has been speaking to protesters.
Well, basically, it's really chaotic and lots of riots going on in Central Square in downtown Beirut at Martyr Square. And as you mentioned, the protesters are they're having different plan this time. They're trying to occupy public buildings like the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, like the Ministry of Finance. They even wanted to break into the central, the banking building. So that's their plan, to occupy these buildings and stay there until these politicians, the political elite, respond to their request and be held responsible and held accountable for what's happened. I'm actually joined now by one of the protesters, Aline, who was just there and she just came out. Aline, tell us what happened and what's going to happen next.
They've just been throwing tear gases on us, and we're just fighting back. This is enough. They've taken our money, they've taken our pride, they're killing us, and they still don't want to resign. This is too much. We can't take it anymore. This is too much. They're gonna fight, we're gonna fight back. They're firing tear gases, we're still going in, we're still fighting, and it's not gonna end here.
And what's your next plan? What's going to happen? Are you planning to protest tomorrow again?
If they're planning to, if the tear gases are to get us away, we're not going to leave, we're going to stay, we're going to fight. This is enough. We can't take it anymore. They've just killed us. Every place in Beirut is destroyed. My house is destroyed. And thank God no one was hurt. But I've lost, most people lost everything. Most people...
Sorry about the loud noise because of the motorcycle. Can you repeat what you're trying to say?
I was saying, I only lost, my house was damaged a bit, but other people lost everything. Their kids, their houses, their money, everything. They don't have anything. They're living on the streets right now.
Some of the people among the protesters are calling for the international community to come in and help them topple the government and get rid of the politicians. What do you say about that?
That's what we want, but as we can see from social media and all of that, they're not even taking the aids just because they're not going directly to them and going directly to the people. The people want it. We need the aids. It's not what they want.
Thank you very much. That was Aline, one of the protesters. As you can see, the anger that they're living through, and they seem to be determined. And as some people are leaving, there are still many people are still in Martyr Square protesting, and there still, it seems that some riot operations taking place with clashes with the army.
Lena Sinjab there in Beirut. Well, let's get some of the day's other news now. Activists in Brazil have released 100,000 balloons in tribute to the people who've died of coronavirus. Brazilians are protesting against the way their president, Jair Bolsonaro, has handled the crisis. He's consistently played down the impact of the virus. Two of his health ministers have resigned in protest. Brazil now has the second highest death toll in the world after the United States. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has angrily condemned a wave of street protests by his opponents. He says they're aiming to trample on democracy. For weeks, thousands of Israelis have been staging protests calling for Mr. Netanyahu's resignation. They're angry with his handling of the pandemic, and they also say he should not be in office whilst also being on trial for corruption. The people of Belarus are going to the polls in a few hours' time to vote in the presidential election. The incumbent, Alexander Lukashenko, a man nicknamed by his critics as Europe's last dictator, is running for a sixth consecutive term of office. The authorities have arrested a second member of the opposition campaign, a close ally of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who's seen as the main challenger to the president, has been detained by the police. President Trump has signed executive orders aimed at providing aid to US workers suffering from the economic impact of the coronavirus. The controversial move comes after talks with Democrats on a proper rescue package broke down on Friday. Mr. Trump plans to defer payroll taxes, to provide protection against eviction, and to extend zero-interest loans for students and give unemployed Americans higher benefits. The BBC's North America correspondent David Willis sent us this report.
With a flick of the pen, President Trump sought both to bypass the nation's elected lawmakers and defend once again the world's largest economy against the ravages of the coronavirus.
Through these four actions, my administration will provide immediate and vital relief to Americans struggling in this difficult time.
'Cause
struggling in this difficult time.
Weeks of negotiation between Democrats and the White House over yet another economic stimulus bill broke down on Friday, with the two sides still trillions of dollars apart. A call by the House Speaker to meet in the middle went unheeded.
So, again, we believe we have a responsibility to try to find common ground. We'll come down $1 trillion, you go up $1 trillion, and we can figure out how we do that without hurting America's working families.
Central to discussions, the future of additional benefits for millions of Americans who found themselves out of work because of the coronavirus. Payments which have prevented many here from falling into poverty. President Trump said they continue until the end of the year, albeit at a lower rate.
That will be a hardship for many. What do you say to them?
Well, no, it's not a hardship. This is the money that they need. This is the money they want, and this gives them a great incentive to go back to work. So this was much more than was originally agreed. The 600 was a number that was there. And as you know, there was difficulty with the 600 number because it really was a disincentive.
Historically, of course, it is Congress and not the president that controls spending here, and Democrats are expected to challenge the president's executive orders in the courts. He says funding for the additional unemployment payments will come from money left over from previous coronavirus relief bills. All this as the number of coronavirus cases here is approaching 5 million. To his supporters, today's action will confirm the president's image as a man of action. But he needed to do something to shore up this beleaguered economy with less than 3 months to go before the election. David Willis, BBC News.
You're watching BBC News, the headlines. Mass protests take place in Beirut over Tuesday's explosion. Tear gas is fired against protesters. A police officer dies in the violence. As Congress in the United States fails to agree a financial aid package to help Americans through the pandemic, President Trump controversially pushes through his own plans with executive orders. France is sending equipment and technical advisors to the Indian Ocean island of Mauritius after its Prime Minister appealed for urgent assistance to contain a worsening oil spill there. The authorities have declared a state of environmental emergency after a Japanese tanker ran aground 2 weeks ago. Tim Allman reports.
Paradise lost. The beautiful, idyllic beaches of Mauritius contaminated by thick, black oil. You can see it lapping at the shore, a dark, toxic tide, endangering wildlife and causing untold damage. And this is where it's all coming from. The MV Wakashio, a stranded Japanese tanker. Look at the huge black streaks cutting through the emerald waters of the Indian Ocean.
There has not been any proper risk assessment done on the vessel to know the probability of the oil spill existing. So this is where we are today, and we are facing one of the major ecological crises that the island is facing.
These satellite images show how the spill has just got worse and worse. This was the ship after it first ran aground. Then look again, a potential 4,000 tons of oil leaking into the sea.
Definitely, marine life is affected. It also affects the communities because there's a lot of fishermen who use the lagoon and eventually that place to fish and earn their living.
The locals are doing what they can to try and protect this pristine environment, considered to have some of the finest coral reefs in the world. But this is a small, impoverished nation dependent on tourism. France has offered to send help, but with fears the tanker may break up, that aid may not arrive in time. Tim Allman, BBC News.
To Poland now, where thousands of protesters have taken to the streets of the capital Warsaw and in many other cities. They're calling for the release of an activist who campaigns for LGBT rights. She was arrested on Friday, accused of hanging rainbow flags on statues in the capital and damaging a van that was covered in homophobic slogans. Alana Petrov has the latest.
Thousands of protesters are standing up for a fellow activist, calling for her release, calling for an end to homophobia and attacks on the LGBT community. The arrested campaigner identifies as a woman named Margot. The authorities call her Michael. In Poland, which is a Catholic country, homophobia is widespread. It's been called the worst country in the European Union for LGBT rights. Some Poles believe homosexuals are pedophiles. The latest election in July indicates this type of thinking isn't changing anytime soon. The ruling Law and Justice Party repeatedly used anti-gay rhetoric in campaigning. It promised to defend traditional family values. It won with a 51% majority. This week, President Andrzej Duda was sworn in for another 5-year term. Members of parliament in the opposition wore rainbow colors, a sign of defiance. Many in the international community have raised concerns about Poland's increasing intolerance. Last month, the EU Commissioner for Equality called out Poland with this tweet: EU values and fundamental rights must be respected by member states and state authorities. She wrote this as the EU denied funding to 6 Polish towns after they declared themselves LGBT-free zones. Meanwhile, Human Rights Watch put out this statement after the activist's arrest. Polish authorities should stop trying to silence activists who support LGBT people's rights and instead promote and protect the right to equality. The advocacy group and these protesters are concerned about the way the country is clamping down on freedom of expression. They worry about a possible sentence for Margot, up to 2 years in prison. They want the authorities to let her go and give them the freedom to live and love as they want, without persecution. Alana Petrov, BBC News.
The black box and cockpit voice recorder have been recovered from an Indian passenger aircraft that crashed in Kerala, killing more than 18 people, including both pilots. 190 people were on board when the plane skidded off the runway and broke in two on Friday night. Jill McGivering reports.
The wreckage shows the force of the impact. The plane skidded off the edge of this tabletop runway and broke in two. That was after earlier attempts to land in heavy monsoon rains and high winds. The flight recorders, just recovered, may help investigators understand the final moments. Locals who rushed to help described screaming, children cowering under seats, and dazed survivors covered in blood. Some of those rushed to hospital are critical, with traumatic head and spine injuries. Those who could paid tribute to the pilots. The captain, a former fighter pilot, had decades of experience. His young co-pilot got married last year. His wife's expecting their first child this month.
The pilot tried hard to land us safely in the rainy weather. It was cloudy, and around 7:30 in the evening we crash-landed. It was difficult to land. He tried a lot.
The passengers are mostly local people stranded in the Gulf by the coronavirus and finally trying to come home. Jill McGivering, BBC News.
The Edinburgh Festival, which normally attracts more than 4 million people to the city every summer, should have been beginning this weekend. But of course, the pandemic means that there will now just be a few limited performances streamed online. Our Scotland correspondent Lorna Gordon looks now at how the cancellation of one of the high points of the arts calendar is affecting the city.
This is the reality of the Edinburgh Festivals this year. No audience, masks, social distancing. A world-class cultural event moved online.
I think it's an enormous loss. I mean, I think that for a lot of people who earn their living at this time of year, it's just a practical loss, which is quite profound. There's an enormous loss in terms of just the sense of joy.
The festivals bring not just culture but also cash and tourists to the city, but not this year. Old Town streets, usually packed with visitors and performers, are much, much quieter.
Do you like it like this?
I do like it like this, but I miss the people as well.
Edinburgh resident and best-selling author Val McDermid is one of many feeling the loss of August's cultural extravaganza.
In many ways, I think the real catastrophe of COVID is still to come. The economic catastrophe and my business in the arts, and what's going to happen with theatres, what's going to happen with concert halls, what's going to happen with gigs. All around the city there's small businesses, everything from sort of bakeries, butcher shops, all sorts of shops that are just not going to open again.
The lack of tourists is having an impact, whether that's festival enthusiasts or wizarding fans. It's left the city centre tills much quieter than before.
This time of year, we would potentially have customers queuing down the streets to just come in and have a browse around. And of course, at the moment, whilst we have reopened, the concern is the footfall is extremely low.
Some here see this as a chance to reimagine the city's relationship with its visitors, which they argue have in recent years reached unsustainable levels.
What makes Edinburgh unique is the fact that people live here and they work in the city centre. We do not want to become like a Venice or a Genoa, but we are heading down that kind of route.
The festivals have a big impact on this small city, support thousands of jobs and make it a global cultural destination. Those here who rely on tourists for their livelihoods will be hoping they return soon. Lorna Gordon, BBC News, Edinburgh.
More on all our stories on our website, bbc.com/news, and I'm on Twitter @JamesBBC News. Do stay with us.